was an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Son of a Trickster. Chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. No, just 10, not 11. In these chapters, we get a pretty depressing look at the everyday life of Jared, and I just feel like this kid, he's doing really shockingly well, all things considered, and I want somebody in his life to have his back at all, and this is just so upsetting. Also, some really interesting information from the sponsor of this episode. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This episode is brought to you by Robin. And Robin sent me this really in-depth email that I thought was super interesting. And I think that you guys will also find interesting. And I asked her if I could read it to you all. And she said, with one thing removed so that her privacy was protected, that I could do that. So I am going to do this. She says, it was really interesting to get an American perspective on the opening. Wow, not a sentence I hear myself saying a lot, but I mean it genuinely in the case of someone as thoughtful as you, which is a huge compliment, so thank you, Robin. I really get what you mean. There are times where I'm like, yeah, I wonder what a man would think of this, and then I'm like, do I? I thought you did a fantastic job of picking up on the context and running with it. While I'm sure she's happy to reach a wider audience, Eden Robinson doesn't do that thing of assuming her audience is non-native and over-explaining everything. So if you're interested in some non-spoilery context, I threw some info together below. Just a note, I'm native through my mother, and says, but I'm from clear across the country, both the Haisla and Heiltsuk people who have stories and practices that aren't shared outside bands or clans, so I'm very much speaking as an outsider here. The Heiltsuk and Haisla are ethnically related but separate coastal people in British Columbia. To use European examples, they're about as closely related as France and Spain, next to each other with languages that belong to the same family but ultimately two different nations. We can assume that Jared is Heiltsuk on his mother's side because the book opens talking about his grandmother Anita living near the Bella Bella band store. About 1,400 people live in Bella Bella, almost all of whom are Heiltsuk. To give you an idea of how remote things can get up there, when the band store caught fire a few years ago, people were facing a 6-hour drive to the nearest grocery store, which, guys, that is banana pants. I had an aunt who lived in Bend, Oregon, and it was a similar, I think it was a 4-hour drive, so not quite as long, but similarly remote. And I want to mention too, she's saying the band store, and I have never heard the word band used to signify a tribe. So I didn't even put together that the Bella Bella band store was a tribe store. I didn't realize that was what that meant. So that was really helpful for me. I don't know about you guys. When Jared and his parents leave the community, they first take the ferry to Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert is the closest city if you're heading north along the coast, but it's still over 13 hours away by car and ferry. About 12,000 people live in Prince Rupert, 38% of whom are indigenous. Several different bands and nations are represented among that 38%. From visiting Nana Sophia, Jared and his parents then continue another 2 hours inland to Kitimat. Kitimat has a population of about 8,500, but that varies a lot depending on whether it's booming or busting, having gotten its start as a company town for aluminum mining before becoming an oil and gas town. Either way, Kitimat itself is only about 11% indigenous. You very ably picked up on everything a non-Indigenous Canadian would, but for Indigenous readers, there's an additional undertone of, oh, this isn't going to go well, in that opening journey. Reserves and non-indigenous majority communities, reserves and indigenous majority communities have their problems, no question. They're by far the poorest communities in the country, and thanks to the past and present wounds of colonization, including the residential school atrocities. Oh, guys, there's a link there. I'll include this link for those of you interested in checking this out. A lot of families are caught in cycles of mental health problems, addiction, and abuse. Add in limited economic prospects, a lack of accessible healthcare, and housing shortages, and it's not ideal. But at the same time, there can be major trauma in the culture shock of leaving your community. Indigenous people, especially women, can fall through the cracks when that social support network is lost. So to see that progression of Jared's mother leaving her home community that's 100% Indigenous, stopping in a town that's just under 40% Indigenous, where there's some extended family support and old friends, and then going to an industry boom town that's by far majority white for work, well, a lot of us know what happens when that boom goes bust and the jobs dry up and you're stuck far from home without your people. Jared and his mother then become what's known as urban Indians, indigenous people living off a reserve and in predominantly white towns. Because of racism, the lack of family community support, and not being able to access federal resources the same way you can when you're living on a reserve as an enrolled member of a band, the deck is stacked against urban Indians. There's a reserve just outside of Kitimat, but it's Haisla, Jared's father and Nana Sophia's nation. The Haisla are matrilineal and historically very hierarchical. Granny Anita refers to Sophia in her letter as Halite, kind of like a shaman, which only nobility can pursue. So Jared and his mother don't really have any connection to that res, and as you can imagine, Jared's mother probably isn't keen on going begging to her noble ex-mother-in-law's people for help. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot online specifically about Heiltsuk and Haisla beliefs. This is partly because some stories are specifically made to be told orally or only shared between certain people, but a bigger part is that in British Columbia, the potlatch, combined diplomatic functions, naming/marriage/funeral ceremonies, dances, feasts, and storytelling events, were outlawed from 1884 until 1951. Between this and other cultural genocide policies, a lot was lost. Guys, 1884 until 1951. How fucking recent is that? That's banana. I get so mad. However, as mentioned in the chat, Weegit is one transliteral of one name for raven, and there are lots of stories about raven told throughout coastal British Columbia. And she linked to a Wikipedia article on that, which I did not read because I kind of want to just sort of let this wash over me in that respect. Regarding whether Jared would be thinking about university or college, which is what we call community colleges or trade schools in Canada, he's probably right on the threshold of having that be a possibility. There's a popular belief in Canada that status Indians, and parenthetically, First Nations people who are registered as such with the government, can go to university for free. This is not true. What is true is that a certain amount of money is allotted to band councils by federal government based on an estimate of how many young people in that band, quote, should statistically be going to college or university and how much that should cost. If kids in that band excel and get accepted into university at a higher rate than expected, tough luck. If the only community college in commutable distance raises its cost, tough luck. If the band store burns down and the council needs to secretly dip into that educational fund to rebuild the only grocery store for 6 hours around, well, you get the picture. While Jared is almost certainly a status Indian, he's living off-res and may or may not be enrolled in the Bella Bella band. Either way, he probably doesn't have any kind of financial aid lined up. He could have a decent chance of getting into the University of Northern BC in Prince George and possibly the University of British Columbia in Vancouver if his grades are good. That would mean leaving his mother and having to take on the cost of living expenses, though, because even the University of Northern British Columbia, the closest to Kitimat, is over 7 hours away. Tuition is much cheaper in Canada than in the US, but Jared would still need to navigate getting loans or applying for scholarships or bursaries, and without a band council or school counselor backing him, that's a challenge. He could make university happen, but the culture in Kitimat wouldn't be as university geared as in cities with closer universities. I'd say he'd more likely have his eye on a trade school. Also, you should absolutely try moose if you ever get the chance. In Canada, you can't sell game, or what we call country meat, in stores, but hunters are always giving some away since you get hundreds of pounds of meat off one moose and it freezes well. Status Indians and Métis, I don't know what that means. Did I miss that earlier? But anyway, have increased hunting and fishing rights, so a lot of people use country meat when at all possible to supplement their groceries. In northern British Columbia, that primarily means salmon and moose. And as a final note, when Jared's mother says, "Cocksucking Richie tonight is the only thing between you and emerge," that's short for emergency room. It's what we tend to say up north instead of ER. Thank you again for your wonderful review. Thank you, Robin, for that awesome information. All super duper helpful. And I had no, like, I feel like with context, I should have realized that she meant emergency room, but I swear to God, that shit did not even enter my head. Like, it's really obvious in retrospect, but I'm just like sitting here like, oh yeah. So anyway, guys, I just really hope that you all found all of that information as interesting as I did. And, you know, I have a basic knowledge of, and when I say basic knowledge, I mean, I think probably more than the average American, but very, very surface understanding of what the reality is for people who live on reservations within the United States. Because I have done some research on that. I have read some books about that, like nonfiction books. And, you know, it's genuinely like, it's horrifying isn't even the word. It makes me so angry that I like stop being coherent for a little bit because I can't believe that it's 2019 and we're still like, kids are still being like taken away from their parents with no warning for no reason and being basically sold to the state for a fee. And this is totally legal and we're just fine with it, I guess. Like, look into what's going on in South Dakota with Native kids and CPS. Just saying. So I understand a lot of that, but the terminology, you know, like, for example, we say reservations or res, but the language that Robin used is reserves, which is not something that we say. And there's just like little things like that that are, because this subject matter is unfamiliar enough to me in the first place, changing up the way things are spoken of is a lot more confusing for me than it would be if somebody was talking about, I'm trying to think of something like maybe cooking. If you were going to talk about cooking and you were calling things by other names within context, because I'm so familiar with all that, the tools and stuff, I'd be like, okay, I get what you mean. You meant this. We call it something slightly different. But this is something that I just don't have a lot of background in at all. So for me, this is just like a completely new world. And yeah, it really does change the way that I see what went down with his mother and them moving away and everything. Like, because when he first gets on that ferry, he's with his parents. And then when we jump forward in time, he has moved away with his mother and her new boyfriend. And that really does seem to be like when the downturn for everything happened. This section, we get a little bit more background on what went down with his father, but it's still so vague, mostly because Jared doesn't seem to really want to know the details. I feel like if he tried to talk to his mother about it, she is such an oversharer that, and she obviously gets really angry about it, that I feel like she would tell him anything that he wanted to know, of course, with a certain amount of venom and rage associated with it. But I really get the feeling that Jared doesn't want to talk about it with her because she gets so angry that it clouds the way that she tells the story, so he doesn't trust what she's going to say. And with, like, in terms of his father has like enough shame surrounding everything that he isn't going to be honest necessarily. He's going to tell things in a softened way to put himself in a better light. And to a degree, that's understandable. But Jared is just really, he seems to be in this place where he's just like, you know what? All I need to know is that my family is broken and ruined, and thanks a lot to this fucking woman who I don't understand what the appeal was and why he was drawn to her, but evidently she was worth ruining everything over. So thanks a lot for that, Dad. So anyway, guys, I'm a little bit ahead of myself here. There is so much going on in this story that I'm having trouble figuring out exactly where to start. Chapter 5, called The Advice and Wisdom of Nana Sophia. Nana Sophia is kind of a bamf. She is in the position, I think, of a lot of the readers where she is watching this young kid take responsibility for the choices adults are making in his life. And she wants so much to step in and be like, this is not your load to bear. You need to back off and let them deal with the consequences of their actions, and you take care of yourself. But that's not an easy thing to do when you are still a kid and you are forced to live with these people and be affected by the consequences of their choices. This isn't something that's happening in another house far across town that he can just avoid going to. When it comes to his father, it is, but his father could wind up homeless because of what's going on with him, which we'll get to. So even though technically he's not living with his dad, and technically his father being like homeless wouldn't, quote, affect him, of course it would affect him. Are you kidding me? So he's really worried about his dad and is doing everything that he can on his end to pay rent for his father, because his father hurt himself and he can't work the same way, and he's only getting disability, and disability is not very much. Like I said, I'm jumping around in the story because that's not brought up here at all with the Nana Sophia chapter. But she has just got this tone to her with the way that she talks to him that is so familiar, because she's saying a lot of the time the things that I would want to say to him also. And there is obviously, she has a little bit more, a bit of an easier time washing her hands of people than he does, because she basically turns her back on her son once he marries this other woman. And that is clearly the difference between her and Jared. Jared is you made a really bad decision. You hurt me. You hurt my mother. You fucked up your life, but you're my father. And in the end, I want you to be okay. She is in the, I warned you not to do this. I told you that I would not support you if you did this. You went and did it anyway, and you are going to get exactly what I told you you were going to get, which is the cold shoulder from me and basically me ignoring that she even exists. So his grandmother is very uncompromising. Now, I am not trying to pass judgment on that. I want to be clear that his grandmother being uncompromising about how she feels about this man's wife and the way she's choosing to deal with now, I don't love the fact that he would end up homeless if it weren't for his son paying his rent. In that sense, I do not agree with Nana Sophia. I feel like she needs to reach out and help her kid with paying his rent. On the other hand, I respect putting up really firm boundaries and sticking to them. And this is something that a lot of people with toxic families have a hard time doing. And, some people are just naturally better able to be selfish. And I say selfish in a non-negative connotation. When I say selfish, what I mean is you got to put yourself first sometimes. Not always, but there are certain things that I just think you need to have a no compromise sort of line with. And not everybody is good at doing that, about getting themselves in the mental space where they feel like that's even okay. And then with following through when stuff starts to get uncomfortable. Obviously, Nana Sophia, she's fine with that. She can do that no problem. And in a lot of ways, I wish that more people were like this, not as I'm going to cut you out of my life and let you be homeless, but simply in the, I do not support what you're doing, and I think you are damaging and toxic, and I don't really want to have anything to do with you anymore. This is something that a lot of my personal friends struggle with, and I, of course, struggle with, and I'll watch them invite someone back into their lives over and over again who has done nothing but take advantage of them, shit all over them and make them feel terrible about themselves, not appreciate a thing that's being done for them even when a person is bending over backward to help. And it's so frustrating to watch over and over again as this person is continually taken advantage of, weeps and grieves over it, and then goes ahead and does it all over again. Now, with Jared, I have to say, he's not a weeper and griever. He gets angry, but he sort of seems so used to being taken advantage of that it's just a fact of life for him that he needs to learn how to cope with. It's not even I need to learn how to avoid this happening to me. It's I need to learn how to live with the fact that this is going to keep happening to me. And that is a fucking simultaneously incredibly pragmatic and mature, but also very depressing place to be. And Jared's POV in this is really like compelling to me because he has this sense of responsibility that I don't know that many other kids his age would have. And it's admirable, but also saddening that he feels like he is in this position at this point in his life. And I think that there are a lot of kids that wind up in this place where they just wind up having to take on more than they should ever have to at that point in life. And it's just, he's 17 at this point, but it's clear this has been going on for a little while by the time we catch up with him here. So now that I've talked about everything but this chapter that I said I was going to talk about for 10 minutes, let's go and talk about it. Come spend Christmas with Nana. I can't get a passport without Mom and Dad's signatures. There is no problem so insurmountable a little charm and buttloads of money can't solve it. Miss you, Nana. Loyalty is admirable unless it's misplaced. Then it's stupid. Thanks, but I don't want to miss the Christmas grudge matches. If your mom and her Neanderthal get too carried away with the holiday booze fest, can you stay with the pride of my loins? Dad's fresh off Oxy. Shirley's on a tear. Her daughter's knocked up and staying with them with her chihuahuas. Well, I think Norman Rockwell painted that picture already. No one's original anymore. And he doesn't know who Norman Rockwell is and has to look it up, and then it's like cracking up. And she says, do you remember when Death Threat first moved in? We discussed ways of showing him the respect he craved. It's only a hunch, but Richie probably doesn't get a lot of that either. I don't know. We're moving back to Canada in the spring. If you haven't figured out a way to get the Neanderthal off your back by then, you can stay with us. My Neanderthal's got a house on Salt Spring. You'd love the island. The tourists are annoying, but we'll have fresh oysters. Thanks, Nana. Sweet dreams, cutie. And that's the end of that chapter. And I just loved it. I loved it. I love knowing that he has something, even if he is not in a position right now to take advantage of it, that there is somebody somewhere who is offering him a kind of safety net. So, amen. And just bless her to pieces. So number 6, Powder House Rules. So we get this, this interesting section. Powder House Rules, I think, has the most mentions of the word cookie of any chapter of any book that I have ever read. There are a lot of things happening here that are both legit and illegitimate. The legit one is that this woman, Teresa, is in charge of the bake sale to raise money for track. And she is serious about it and really, really organized. And I, as somebody who appreciates that kind of thing, was so deeply satisfied reading the way that she set this up. Because most people, when they set up a bake sale, what they do is they create a list from all these different people about what they're going to make, and they plan out exactly how much they're going to have to sell and figure out how much they need to price everything out so that they can sell enough to make the money they need and make it worth everybody's while. And they organize it so that everyone comes and takes a spot at their table, taking and exchanging money for the particular thing that they made. That's how it worked at the 2 schools that I went to in different states that had that. And this is a totally other thing. She, she creates a basically fresh baked cookie conveyor belt sort of thing. By going from house to house and getting a bunch of toaster ovens and collecting them in her car and then bringing them to school and plugging them all in the hallway on these long tables. And she has already had a cookie dough making party. So they bring in all the dough that's already made, and then they bake the cookies fresh in the toaster ovens in the hallway. excuse me, why doesn't every school do it this way? Guys, if you're listening and your school did it this way, please tell me, because I've never seen this before and it's genius. Try. I beg you, try to have the scent of freshly baked cookies in the hallway at a school. A fucking school. I would say anywhere, really. You could go to town hall and this would be a problem, but at a school, forget it. And not get mobbed and have everybody trying to buy shit off you. Not happening. Like, this is just a perfect idea, and I just respected it so deeply, even though it's a really throwaway little piece of the story. And Jared, even though it's like lame that he has to wear a hairnet and oven mitts, he's still very much like, yeah, well, it's lame. What are you going to do? But when kids outside his trusted circle asked him for cookies, he could play dumb and tell them to come to the next bake sale. It was a good cover, and possibly a source of future character witnesses. And one of these kids that comes up to the table, his name is Alex. He is a goth, and he is dense as hell. And Alex is thinks he's being subtle. I want green cookies. I'm looking for strong cookies. And finally, Jared is just like, dude, are you going to buy a fucking cookie? Like, he's much more polite than that, but the intent is the same. And then he leaves and he goes and hangs out with Mr. Jax while Mrs. Jax goes to the doctor. Now, the understanding that this is a much more, I would assume that Mr. and Mrs. Jax are Indigenous also, gives me a little better understanding of this involvement in the community, because I have to be straight up with you guys that every place that I have lived, I don't think I have known the names of any of my neighbors except one time when I was like in elementary school. And this involvement, he gets paid for it, so sure. But this kind of involvement and care that he pays to all of this has a tone to it that I don't understand. And this is something that maybe, like, having lived in a more suburban environment, that I don't really like have a sort of frame of reference for, but it sounds like he's sort of suburban too, granted in a low income area, but still. Robin's here. Mrs. Jax is First Nations. Mr. Jax is Czech. Okay, cool. Thank you. I think they did mention that earlier, huh? You're right. So let's see. She thought she might have a lingering case of the mumps or an infected gland in her throat, and was annoyed that her doctor was insisting she go to his office to get that news. So when you're like being insisted to if you are being pushed to go to see the doctor for your results, that's bad news. And it's pretty clear that she's like kind of aware. She puts it off as being like, oh, I'm just annoyed at the inconvenience of going in. But obviously I'm annoyed because I'm afraid and I don't want to hear what he has to say to me. And this cut a little close to home for me, because Owen's grandfather, who is a big part of my life now, recently got diagnosed with cancer and I'm trying to remember exactly where it is, because it's in his throat, in the spot that she is describing here, that he thought he had an infected gland also. And it turns out that he has cancer, and they thought that they could just remove his tonsils at first, and that would take care of it. And it turned out the cancer had gone further in. They were going to go in surgically to remove it, and it turns out they wouldn't be able to get it all. So now he is having to undergo chemotherapy, and he is like in the second half of the stretch, but it is really something, like, to watch somebody constantly being told, like, well, it's not that bad, we can probably just do this, and everything doesn't work, and it's slowly like you start to realize that this is worse than they thought, or maybe worse than they wanted to say. So this particular thing, I was just like, oh fuck, is she gonna have what Owen's grandpa has? So this is a scene where Jared is dealing with Mr. Jax, and trying, and he's sort of learned how to handle the guy, because Mr. Jax is suffering from pretty bad dementia, to the point that he literally has hallucinations, we find out later. He is yelling about the Russians stealing his potatoes at one point, and he's like looking out the window and yelling about it like he's watching it happen, even though the ground is covered in snow outside. So like, this is a sincere, and there is nothing wilder than watching somebody who's having a hallucination and seeing how sincerely and completely they believe it. It really makes you question reality, because like we completely and sincerely believe in what's happening and what we're seeing, but the difference is other people agree with us. So what happens when people just stop agreeing with you? And I had my grandfather, like he had full on sensory hallucinations where he thought he was eating, and he would offer food to people in the room because he was so certain he was spooning up soup in a spoon and eating it and talking about how good it was. And do you want any soup? And offering it. There's nothing there. And I just, the fact that Jared is able to cope with him, he's not perfect, like she has to say something to him a little bit later about like, you keep contradicting him when he's having these hallucinations, but that doesn't do any good. And it doesn't. It just agitates him. So just tell him whatever you need to tell him to get him to calm down in the moment, and leave the fact that it's not real out of it. Because frankly, that's not even relevant anymore. Whether it's real or not is not the issue. He believes it is, and that's all there is to it. But Jared is able to cope with this, fairly well. And the whole way that this ends with her coming home and like kind of throwing down a rotisserie chicken and going up to her room. And he knows it has to be bad news because she always considers bringing home rotisserie dinner to be kind of like below her. It's just a sad moment because she doesn't she appreciates, I think, that he's there and helping her with her husband. But the fact that she doesn't feel like she can even talk to Jared about it. Like, of course she doesn't feel that way. He's a teenager. What is she going to say to him? I just feel bad for her. She's very alone, Every Wednesday after school, Jared delivered the Northern Sentinel. He'd start 2 streets over from his own. Near the end of his route, Mrs. Brantford would wait for him in her lift chair in the front window and wave as he came up her walkway. Her son grew medical marijuana and regularly gave her a plastic grocery bag of odds and ends for her glaucoma. Death Threat had sold her a vaporizer a few days before he left town and had tasked Jared with delivering it and collecting the money. His mom hadn't liked it, but Death Threat had said Mrs. Brantford wouldn't rat out a 14-year-old, and if Jared was caught, his juvie record would be expunged when he became an adult. Jared had been very, very careful with Mrs. Brantford, but she turned out to be game for a new pot experience, and she'd asked how to work the contraption, and they'd spent all afternoon getting completely blitzed in her sitting room and eating their way through her collection of Cadbury chocolates. So that's a pretty fun little background of Mrs. Brantford. She's just like, yeah, let's do this, baby. If she invited him in for a beverage, she had something to sell him. He handed her the money in a newspaper, and her eyes lit up like a kid at Christmas. So she goes to the casino and does the slot machines. Side note, guys, I went to play the slots this past weekend for the first time ever in my life. I've been to a casino one other time, the night before I got married, so 2008. God, 10 years ago, 11 years ago almost, because it was in May I got married, so almost 11 years ago. I can't handle how old I'm getting. It is the worst, and I do not understand the appeal at all. The slot machine, it was like, first of all, there's like 1,000 different themed slot machines, which I just find so unnecessary. They're all doing the same thing. Like, why? And secondly, they're inscrutable. I don't understand like when you're supposed to have won and when you're not. It's just the machine just decides. And it's a lot of money for almost no payback at all. We went through $10 in about 3 minutes. I can think of 50 different ways to spend that $10 that's better than that. I don't get it. I just do not get it. There is nothing that makes it fun. The atmosphere is depressing. It's filled with smoke and people are loud and it's just like kind of tacky and your money goes to nothing. You don't get anything back for it. And it's just like, I don't get it. Oh my God. So anyway, he goes back to, let's see. Oh, yeah. He goes to Pizzarama, where he gets a pretty good deal on pizza because the woman knows his mom. And then he goes to the Powder House. This place is full of stoners who do a lot of snowboarding. And it's basically like his sort of... It's almost like you rent a community kitchen, if any of you guys have ever heard of that, for people who are trying to start like a food business and they don't, can't afford their own commercial space. It's like that, but for drug food, for edibles. And these guys like take a cut of what Jared makes in exchange for him getting to use their kitchen. Because if he makes his stuff at home, his mom and Rich eat it all. But if he makes it anywhere else, he gets in trouble. So this is something that he can, this deal he's worked out seems to be pretty good. So Jared, it turns out, like, nobody else seems to really be able to make the weed cookies as well as he is able to. And that's interesting to me because I don't find so I'm going to out myself here and just hope that there are no cops listening. But I have recently started taking to making weed brownies. I have never smoked weed. Like, I think I smoked once for the first time when I was like 25. But I have never been into weed and I have never really understood the draw of it until this last year when I went to California and a friend had a bunch of edibles because it's legal there. And we had some pieces of cookie and, a glass of some cocktail and hung out by the pool. And I suddenly felt like truly relaxed for the first time in literal years. It was the kind of feeling that I was just like, how have I not realized this is how I can turn my brain off this whole time? Because my brain races and my anxiety is out of control. And this is one of the only things I've ever encountered that helps. And so I can't smoke it. I get a terrible, I think that I have low-grade asthma and this just irritates it really badly. So I have to do it as an edible. And it takes it's a little tricky to do, but it's really not that hard. All you have to do is basically you roast the weed in the toaster oven, at least I do, at a really, really low temperature. I do 225. Leave it in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then you simmer it in the butter you're going to be using for the recipe for another hour. So you need the heat to be on really, really, really low. And it extracts all of the activated THC and CBD out of the weed that's in the butter into the fat because it needs fat in order to be absorbed. And then you cool that butter down and use it as you would use any other butter for your recipe. Sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's really not bad. And the fact that everybody is after him for cookies, they can't make them themselves, is really funny to me. And it's not that it rings untrue because people like to be able to just buy stuff. That's the way our country, the world now is. We love not having to do stuff for ourselves. And I don't mean that in any sort of, it sounds when I say that, I'm being oh, we're so lazy nowadays. But the truth is we like to have consistent products in our lives. And if we aren't great at doing a certain thing, we don't want to take that on because we're not going to wind up with the same exact experience or product that we had before. Almost definitely. So having somebody who is experienced do something for us so that we have the consistent thing that we want, it's part of why chain restaurants and Starbucks are so popular. We know what we're getting. And these people are just so pleased with what he makes that they're really demanding about it. And I wish to God that he didn't have to go through everything that he has in order to make this stuff because it's really obvious that he has some sort of special knack for this. And I wish that he could legally... Can we just legalize it already? Is where I'm just going to end with this. Can we just... The making weed illegal targets already oppressed communities, and that's the whole reason that we keep it illegal. And let's be honest about it. And legalizing it just increases so much of the tax revenue for states. Just do it already, you guys. So he's standing there simmering the butter. He uses a double boiler. I do not do that, but I may do that next time because what I did last time didn't work out so hot. And he gets jumped. And he calls it he got rolled, which I have only ever heard that term in the context of like a sex worker doing it. Like, this is not something I realized that you just call it when somebody like knocks you out and mugs you. But he wakes up and his shoes are gone, his wallet's gone, his coat is gone, and the butter that he was cooking is like burning on the stove, and it's just like all of his ingredients are ruined. This was such a bummer to read. He's just trying to fucking like make a buck, and not even so that he can like go jerk off somewhere. He's trying to make a buck so that his father doesn't get kicked out of his house. Like, this is not a joke. And I feel so bad about how long it takes for him. Like, he clearly has a concussion. He's vomiting over and over again. He like can't get control of himself. And this guy, this blonde dude who was in the house, like passed out when he got there, is being a complete dick because he doesn't realize what happened. And I think that he thinks that Jared is like passed out from drug use on the ground. I don't think he realizes that Jared is like just got rolled. And the guy, it turns out that his name is Kyle, and Kyle is just so completely like unreasonable about the whole thing, being like, well, why don't you just make cookies with our stuff, guy? Like, he's throwing up uncontrollably. Let him go home, you selfish piece of shit. Hey, I want cookies, man, Kyle said. This is bullshit. Go buy off someone else, Jared said. And after all the business we gave you, you disloyal asshole. Go to hell, Kyle. For all I know, you're the asshole that rolled me. Chill, Saul said. Guys, fucking chill. Hey, we're loyal customers and he's treating us like shit. He's a kid, Kyle. Fucking lay off the crank and rediscover your brains. Fuck you, Saul. Fuck you. Kyle stomped out of the kitchen. We got shit canned, Saul said. Everyone's bummed. Jared coughed and waited, feeling the muscles in his stomach clench. You're fired? Saul sighed and hopped up on the counter. Yeah, the foreman's buddies showed up, and our drug tests were suddenly relevant. He let us go. We'd stay, but it looks like we're blackballed. So this is an option that is used up. He makes one last batch of cookies in exchange for them giving him a pair of boots and a jacket. And it's just, I feel really like they offer for him to come with, but he assumes when they offer this that it's not really like serious. And this part, guys, Saul gave him a muscle relaxer shaped like a little house and told him to go crash if he felt like it. Jared washed the pill down with a swig of beer, then wobbled toward Saul's bedroom, which was filled with cardboard boxes. He flopped on the bare mattress, turning over to stare at the ceiling. Music blared to life, a frantic, trippy trance tune, the subwoofer so loud the windows rattled. Jared considered the distance between Powder House and the nearest bus stop. He also considered calling his mom for a ride, but she'd bring Richie, and they'd end up crashing the party, and he wouldn't get home. Y'all, when you can't call your parents, not because they're going to be mad at you, but because they are going to get involved with the shit that you're in and ruin your plan to get home, that is a depressing fucking situation, man. So at this point, this girl comes in, and this is wild. She says, "Cookie dude," when she comes in, which just reminds me of Friends and the episode where Ross sells cookies. He's trying to like sell Girl Scout cookies, I think, for his daughter. And he goes to the NYU campus in the middle of the night, and they start following him because everybody's stoned, and they go, "Cookie dude," and that's like what he's called. He says, "Yes, I'm the cookie dude, and my name is Jared." Did I say that already? Murchadh. I'm trying to say, because her name is spelled Murchadh. And it makes me want to go, Murchadh. Murchadh? Murkhad. I don't know. I liked the magic in your baking. Thanks. It's a decent bud. I'm sensing loss in you. I'm sensing mourning. He wanted to say something clever to make her laugh, but nothing witty would come. My dog died. We're all going to die soon enough, she said. Glass half empty, huh? We're in the Anthropocene, the human-driven extinction event. But we're all information, so no one really dies. Is that the Mayan prophecy? 2012, end of the world stuff? She kissed him. His lips tingled. She sat back, breathing hard. Her lips sparkled greenish white in the dim light, like glow-in-the-dark stars blinking. Whoa, Jared thought. She touched her lips. What are you? So high, he said. My mother was a Selkie. Cool, Jared said, not sure which country that was. Magic calls to magic, she said. I belong to the sea. Who do you belong to? I'm not seeing anyone, if that's what you're asking. You have the moon in your eyes, she said. Yep, she's stoned out of her gourd, Jared decided. Yeah. And I have the ocean in mine. Is that poetry? Shh, she said, unbuttoning his shirt. So her mom was a Selkie. Guys, Selkies look like seals, but are actually women who put on a seal skin. Depending on the legend, they are trapped and forced to do this. If you burn the seal skin, they are forced to live as a woman forever and not be able to transform again. And depending on the legend, that either kind of frees them from an enchantment or traps them, and they are super unhappy and desperate to get back into the water for the rest of their lives and never actually feel like they're a person. So it could go either way with how tragic that story is. But I don't doubt this girl for a second. Her mother was definitely a Selkie. She is not nuts. And she senses some magic in him because obviously. So we will come back to this. Let's go to Chapter 7, Norman Rockwell Redux. This is where we get the deal with fucking Destiny, his cousin. Now, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to speed through this. But in summary, Destiny's useless. And I just have no time for her. I am not even trying to fault her for not wanting to be a parent, because that is fair. I don't either. And not all of us are educated on how to protect ourselves from getting pregnant or given the resources to protect ourselves from getting pregnant, unfortunately. I think that is something that we should just be working on as a society, as a foundation for having a more sustainable social system, but whatever. So the fact that she's gotten pregnant and is not ready to handle this, I'm not even mad at her for that, because that just feels like what is going to happen to a lot of people. However, she has no sort of what's the word I want? Initiative in terms of dealing with any of the shit that his father is getting hit with right now. And I'll just read this little bit because this is the part that I just was is Dad here? He's in the hospital, Destiny said, his back again. The new meds aren't working, or they aren't working together, something like that. Why didn't you text me? Do you know when he's getting out? Remembrance Day, I think. I got rolled, Jared said. Shit, we're almost caught up on back rent. I've got another sale in a week or so. That'll bring you guys up to date, and then we just have to worry about January. Thank Christ, Destiny said. The shelter won't take dogs. Did the insurance people get back to him about his disability claim? I don't know. Did you call them? Did you ask if they got all the support papers? Do I look like a secretary? Destiny, this is important. Destiny hugged Ho-Ho, glaring at the table. They don't listen to me. Girl, shut the fuck up. They don't listen to you. Get on the motherfucking phone. You are about to be kicked out, and you need to take a tiny bit of responsibility for that. Holy shit. Being overwhelmed by the fact that you're pregnant and everything is all well and good, but this would be the reality if you had a kid on the way or not, and you need to grow the fuck up. Holy shit. Girl. I just can't imagine being this passive in this situation. You know, I can't. So they go to Walmart and get a bunch of stuff for the baby, for the house, yada, yada, yada. Destiny made him lunch. Shirley staggered out, ran the tap and poured herself a glass of water, then went back to her room, trailing booze fumes that made his eyes water. Jared had expected the woman who broke up his parents' marriage to be wildly hot, but she was mousy with large, scared eyes. Jared ate his sandwich and drank his tea. Destiny hugged him for a long time when he left. She tried to get Ho-Ho to kiss him, and he said he had to go. So he goes and sees his dad, and his dad is trying to, like, make the best of it. But it's clear that he's really suffering from not being able to, like, get the oxy that he... And, like, it sounds like he had a problem, and he's being kept off of it because of this addiction. But it's just... this is such a shit situation. I just feel bad for him. The big issue in the divorce was the house. His dad's back was never going to be the same, and the disability check was small. His dad had wanted to sell the house because he didn't think they'd be able to keep up the mortgage and the bills. His mom had dug in and refused, saying they had to fight for it. Jared watched his dad sleep fitfully and in obvious pain, and he suspected that neither of his parents could stand to be reminded of his old dad, the strong one, the guy who'd once nicked his shin with a chainsaw and kept bucking wood. And then, of course, there was Shirley. Maybe his dad hadn't been fooling around with her while he was married, like he claimed. But the second he met Shirley in physio, he started acting like his old self. He was protective of her, constantly wrapping his arm around her shoulders, defending her against all slights, asking if she was cold. Seconds after the divorce, they'd moved in together. Nana Sophia hadn't shown up for their wedding, and although invited, wouldn't go to any of Shirley's family potlatches. I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's potlatches, but expected her son to make an appearance at hers in Alert Bay. Nana didn't include Shirley in the invitation and only sent a plane ticket for Phil. When his dad didn't go, they'd stopped talking. Nana said Shirley and her family were jumped-up commoners who didn't know how to potlatch properly. His dad said Nana was a stuck-up old coot who'd gotten her money by being a low-rent Elizabeth Taylor. As for his mom, Jared wasn't sure if it was being saddled with the mortgage or being unceremoniously dumped for someone dishwater plain that drove her to instant rage whenever someone mentioned Philip Martin's name. She had spent Shirley and Phil's wedding day burning every single photo of him she could find in an old carved bowl, eventually tossing in the jewelry he'd given her and bits of his clothes as she roundly cursed him and his whore. I can't help but wonder if the curse isn't exactly what it sounds like and is a genuine curse, and that something like their luck is so down because his mom did something. I'm not even trying to say that she did that shit on purpose, but there's magic happening in this book, and I feel like that means something. And after the whole mess with David, his dad had come to see Jared in the hospital, which, like, what did David fucking do? So this next section, the Christmas tree hunt, Jared decides that he's going to shave his head because, for one thing, he hasn't had a haircut in a while, but for another, he thinks having the same haircut as Richie might, like, make Richie warm to him a little bit. And it seems to kind of work, which is such a basic thing that's like, it's almost like assuming this will work is almost insulting to the person you're trying to work it on, but apparently, you know, it does. Over the next few days, Richie wasn't exactly his best bud, but he stopped calling him useless, and the threats to kick his ass into tomorrow went down, and that was all Jared really wanted. So then comes this whole section where he gets woken up in the middle of the night because the power went out. There's a bad snowstorm, and he gets, like, brought to this cabin in the middle of the woods with his mom and Richie, and they have this huge truck with 2 snowmobiles in the back. And it's clear that the shit was stolen. And they say that it's not stolen, that we traded because somebody couldn't pay their debt, but they took it, you know, like, obviously. And his mother is able to sell this stuff off later and use that to pay off the mortgage so that they actually own the house. Which, like, on the one hand, I don't like that they just take shit from people. On the other hand, I appreciate that the fucking house is paid for. That's a pretty big deal. So I have just very mixed feelings about this because I just kind of want things to be good for Jared. And as bad as that is for anybody else, it's very good for him. And I appreciate it, you know? So then we go to Ebony Stewart. And Ebony Stewart is a bit preppy. Her family's got money. She does her best to not stand out too much academically because it's not a good way to be popular. And she's pretty into weed. And she offers to let Jared use her kitchen to make his cookies if she can take half the cookies or half the profits, which he thinks is a little steep and he's not really ready to agree to yet. But when he considers, he's like, there's really not another option for me at this point. And he really needs to get his dad caught up on rent. So he's like, you know what? All right, fine. She's going to fucking fleece me a little bit, but I can deal with that. And so he takes it on and does it. And I just love the fact that like she's got this really shitty douchebag boyfriend who's like, I feel like this author is super good at writing teenage voice. And how, like, kind of simultaneously incredibly irritating, but also super basic they can be. And he gets on writing these cookies and, like, gets noticed. She has bought pastel bags with, like, pink and blue ribbons to tie on them. This girl is me in a few ways. Like, I'm not even going to lie. I'm kind of digging Ebony a little bit here. Ebony and Teresa, the two of them together with a bake sale idea, they would be unstoppable. Forget it. He should work with the two of them. And he's just sort of, like, stunned at how well this is going. But it gets to a point where like, her boyfriend is getting really pushy about wanting more. And shows up at Jared's house wasted and like vomits and is just, you know, he's not just high, he's also drunk and he's just causing a fucking scene. The whole thing is just so frustrating. And he drives this guy back to his own house finally, but the dude's dad comes outside and causes this scene. And Jared could give a shit about this guy's dad and calls him like a piece of shit. He's like, just really not intimidated at all. But this winds up getting Dylan in trouble and Ebony not in trouble, but she feels like if Dylan's in trouble, then so is she. And she tells Jared basically, if you fuck this up again, you're not using my kitchen anymore. So stop it. We have Nana who sends Jared some money, tells him that, it's for Christmas and it's for you and do not give it to your father or your mom. He tries to tell her that this isn't, you know, like necessary, but she just says, the money is for you. I mean it. And he writes back, Destiny's having her baby soon. My pretty enabler, repeat after me. I'm not responsible for the crappy decisions of the grown-ups in my life. Jared rolled his eyes. Love you, Nana. Love you more, cutie. So yeah, he's most definitely using this money for Destiny. So there's a short scene that I find really interesting where Blake comes over and has a black eye and Jared very carefully does not mention it, but it's clear that he got it from his dad. And Jared teaches Blake how to load this gun that he got given by Richie finally. Because they're both a little worried that his dad's going to come walking in and try and beat the shit out of him again. And living in that kind of fear is just, that sucks. So I liked that scene because there's so little dialogue between the two of them, but there is just this deep understanding of the situation and no questions asked, but a solution immediately presented and a like kind of I've got your back vibe. Even though they don't have a deep heartfelt heart to heart about it. It's just, it's a different way of coping, but it seems to work for them and, you know, more power to them. So Jared takes the bus to see his dad and Destiny again. And she has had her baby by this time. And he's on his way, and he gets stopped by this guy on the bus who is like being really chatty. And Jared is doing everything he can to avoid small talk, and this guy won't take no for an answer. And finally, this guy says, "Luke, I am your father." Jared glared at him, wishing he'd go away. "Philip Martin isn't your father, Jared," the guy said quietly. "I'm your real dad. My name is Wiegert. Your mother shot me in the head when—" "Freak," Jared said. He stood up, grabbed the pole, and hopped over the guy. "I'm not lying to you." So this guy finally gets off the bus, and Jared looks out the window at him, and he's gone, and a raven flies away, and Jared's looking all over the place and can't see the guy. And Jared does not seem to put it together that a raven talked to you not that long ago, dude, and seemed to know all about you. Maybe these things are connected. But he obviously thought that was just him being high and having a hallucination, so he's not putting those things together. I am dying to know. She shot me in the head. What? Why? That sounds like her. Don't get me wrong. That's on brand. But why? And I have to wrap this up. But this ends this chapter with fucking Destiny asking for Jared's help, getting him to stay overnight against his better judgment, and she bails. She says she's going to go buy more diapers and disappears for like half the day and comes back obviously fucked up. And he's like, "Are you kidding me right now?" Got the diapers, she said. "Not fucking funny," Jared said. "What?" Destiny said. "What's the big deal? You didn't even fucking ask. You just took off." "Jeez, you big baby. That was like, what, 4 hours? 5? I'm going to pay you." "I gave you that money," Jared said. "You want to pay me with my own money?" "Family helps you," she said. "We're family." "That doesn't mean you get to dump your kid on me and take off to party. That's not cool." "I'm going to bed." "Whatever, I'm gone." "Can you just watch him while I take a shower? A few more minutes?" Jared put on his jacket. Destiny glared at him. "You're just like everyone else," she said, "taking off when things get hard." "I'm not your sucker," Jared said, shoving his feet in his boots. "I don't like being played." "I didn't play you, you fucking drama queen," she shouted after him as he stomped down the sidewalk. "Some uncle you are." So she starts texting him after this, like, "Ben misses you, I miss you, yada yada," and he's just like, "Don't even fucking try it." And he goes and talks to his mom. She smells puke on him and doesn't know about Destiny and the baby and thinks that he's been like getting way too drunk. And he asks his mom, "Did you ever think of not having me?" She asks immediately, "Did you knock someone up?" "No, I have not knocked anybody up." "I've never regretted you," she said, pouring him a mug of coffee. "You little weirdo." And that is the end of the chapter. So I really like that he can see how bad this is and that it makes him think about this. But I also love that as huge a disaster as his mother is, she clearly really does love him like so much. And that can make up for a lot. Not everything, certainly, but it helps, you know? And it was just kind of touching, that moment, you know? Destiny, girl, you need to fucking... The dad like promised to be there and promised to help pay for stuff and took off, because that's what they do. Like, I personally know 3 women who got pregnant, and the guys swore up and down they were going to help and do the right thing, and they all disappeared. It's just disgusting, and men are trash. Hashtag not sorry. So yeah, I'm mad at Destiny, but I'm also mad at everybody, and that she has to be in this situation, and it's just super unfair. She's blaming him for like not like leaving when things get hard because she needs somebody to blame, and the person that deserves the blame is not there. So it's just like, I like want to hate her a lot more than I find myself able to, if that makes sense. But yeah, so this was just like, this is a compelling story with a very real feeling world, and I'm just into it. So, Robin, like a maniac, went and bought all of the coverage for this book, like outright after the first episode. And I'm super excited. Thank you, Robin, for doing that. Huge help to me financially in the first place, but also it's so exciting to know that I'm like, that this book is set and taken care of and that I get to read the whole thing. So I'm very excited. So guys, stay tuned because the next episode will be coming up pretty soon. And thank you, Robin, very much again. I hope you guys are enjoying this coverage and learning something. I'm learning a lot from this. I find it very fascinating. And yeah, I'll be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.